This segment of WGCU's local Untold Stories is underwritten by Lee County Government, County Commission, City of Fort Myers City Council, Edison Ford Winter States Foundation, Charles Edison Fund, Edison National Bank, and Bank of the Islands.
Thomas Alva Edison was a man synonymous with wizardry and invention, known the world over for his research and discoveries. During the late 19th century, he was perhaps the most celebrated living person in the world, and it was during this time that he met the woman who, while most well known for simply being the wizard's wife, would leave her own lasting mark. Her name was Mina Miller, and she would become Edison's second wife. Mina Miller's upbringing perhaps helped prepare her well to be the wife of a famous man. Mina, the seventh of 11 children, was born in Akron, Ohio in 1865. Her father, Lewis, was a wealthy inventor and manufacturer in his own right and a strong proponent of the cultural and social benefits of education. When Mina was a child, her father helped found a group eventually known as the Chautauqua Institution. Located in upstate New York on Lake Chautauqua, by the end of the 19th century, it was nationally known as a center where visitors came for earnest but high-minded activities aimed at intellectual and moral self-improvement and civic involvement. Mina spent most of her childhood summers at Chautauqua, and her time there would help shape an appreciation of art, culture, religion, and education that she possessed throughout her life. As a teenager, Mina attended and graduated from high school, spent a year traveling Europe, and then attended a finishing school in Boston. And it was here that Mina would make the contacts that eventually would bring Thomas Edison into her life. While in Boston, Mina became an acquaintance of Lillian Gilliland, the wife of Edison's longtime friend Ezra Gilliland. Ezra shared a variety of business and scientific pursuits with Thomas Edison, and the two also shared a great friendship. Ezra also has been credited with introducing society, dress, and manners to Edison, a man not known for his social graces. A year earlier, Edison's wife of 12 years, Mary Stilwell, died at the age of 29. Mary and Thomas had 3 children, Marion, nicknamed Dot, Thomas Jr., nicknamed Dash, and William. By 1885, a year after his wife's death, Edison, already internationally known for his invention of the phonograph, his pivotal role in the launching of the electric power and light industry, as well as other achievements, was by all accounts one of the world's most eligible bachelors. During that summer, Edison was a welcome visitor at the Gillilands' Boston home, making regular trips from his laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey, and offices in New York City. Edison's constant companion, 12-year-old Dot, was at his side and would later reminisce about what her father had made known to Mrs. Gilliland. He wanted a home, a wife, and a mother for his 3 children and asked Mrs. Gilliland to introduce him to some suitable girls. Mrs. Gilliland was quick to oblige, and among the many contenders was 20-year-old Mina Miller. By all accounts, Mina was a beautiful young woman with rich, great hair and great dazzling eyes, and though Edison, at 38, was nearly twice her age, he was instantly smitten. As one of Edison's diary entries reflects,
"Saw a lady who looked like Mina, got thinking about Mina, and came near being run over by a streetcar. If Mina interferes much more, we'll have to take out an accident policy."
Mina's involvement in the eligibility lineup at the Gillilands did not last long during that summer of '85, as early on she left Boston to be with her family in Chautauqua, and she was dearly missed by Edison. Throughout his life, Edison kept detailed records of his research findings in thousands of notebooks and journals, but he kept a personal diary for less than 2 weeks during the time he met and eventually began courting Mina.
constantly talking about Mina, who me and Damon use as a sort of yardstick for measuring perfection.
Another entry describes Edison's uncharacteristic romantic frame of mind.
This is by far the nicest day of the season, neither too hot or too cold. It blooms on the apex of perfection, an Eden day, good day for an angel's picnic. They could lunch on the smell of flowers and new mown hay, drink the moisture of the air, and dance to the hum of bees.
As for Mina, when asked how she felt about Mr. Edison after one of their first encounters at the Gilliland home, she simply replied,
"Just a genial, lovely man."
Edison's and Mina's paths continued to cross that fateful summer, either when Edison visited Chautauqua or during day trips and weekend getaways arranged and chaperoned by the Gillilands. When apart, the pair corresponded regularly, and by August they were officially courting. During the summer, Edison taught Mina the basics of Morse code, and Edison's daughter, Dot, would later tell the story of his proposal. She saw her father tap the question out in Mina's hand, and Mina tapped back her affirmative reply. In September, as was in accordance with the customs of the day, Edison sent a letter to Mina's father asking for her hand in marriage.
The step I have taken in asking your daughter to entrust her happiness into my keeping has been the result of mature deliberation, and with the full appreciations of the responsibility and the duty I have undertaken to fulfill.
Thomas Alva Edison and Mina Miller were married a few months later, February 24, 1886, at the Miller home in Akron. At age 20, the new Mrs. Edison became a stepmother to Edison's and Mary's 3 children, and it was not an easy task, as she was less than 10 years older than stepdaughter Marion. Although Mina tried to nurture her new family, Marion later described her as too young to be a mother, but too old to be a chum. Mina and Thomas would eventually go on to have 3 children of their own, Madeline, Charles, and Theodore. The new Edison family made their home at Glenmont, a 23-room mansion in West Orange, New Jersey, located near the Edison laboratory and factories, but they would spend many of their winters in the then little-known town of Fort Myers. Edison had traveled to the Fort Myers area in search of warmer weather, and it was while following a trail of bamboo up the Caloosahatchee River in search of the perfect material for the light bulb filament that he discovered the land for his Fort Myers property. This all occurred during the same time Thomas met and courted Mina. Edison fell in love twice that year, once with Mina and again with the town of Fort Myers. He purchased nearly 14 acres along the Caloosahatchee River and built 2 homes, one of which was eventually purchased by his friend Ezra Gilliland. Each had his slice of paradise for a winter retreat, and of course Edison had a laboratory so that he could have working vacations. This Fort Myers paradise is where Thomas and Mina spent their honeymoon. Mina and Fort Myers were inescapably intertwined for Thomas Edison. They would prove to be 2 loves that endured a lifetime. In one of Edison's few diary entries, he eloquently and lovingly described the Fort Myers property.
Our Floridian bower in the lowlands of the peninsular Eden, within the charmed zone of beauty.
Seminole Lodge, as it would come to be called, was merely a part-time residence for the Edisons. As a winter resident, Mina was admittedly slow to accept the town and its people, but letters and accounts show that she eventually embraced the small but growing community, and as her acceptance and appreciation of Fort Myers grew, so did the role she would play in shaping the town's future and, in turn, becoming an integral part of its history.
Mina Edison is one of the most admirable people in American history, especially in local Southwest Florida history. She managed to make a life for herself and an impact on the community, which I think is still felt today.
Although Edison was a devoted husband, Mina quickly realized that his work often would consume most of his time. Perhaps by necessity, during their honeymoon trip, Mina took an active interest in her husband's work and would even work at his side, witnessing and recording some of the thousands of technical notebook entries Edison kept throughout his life and career. Fortunately, Mina and Thomas shared an interest in conservation and horticulture, and together they spent time designing elaborate gardens for their tropical home. It is unclear how much input Mina had in the initial stages of the Fort Myers house, but she undoubtedly had a hand in designing and executing the estate's gardens. Mina's love and appreciation of flora and fauna would eventually extend well beyond the borders of Seminole Lodge, and the city of Fort Myers would benefit from her affinities.
She saw something in the community, she admired the people, and she tried to share, not to give like a charity, but to share things that she had to offer with her friends and neighbors.
Mina appears to have been of two minds in her relationship with the town. On the one hand, she reveled in its tropical beauty and splendor and enjoyed the family's time away from the hustle and bustle of the more developed Northeast. Still in all, she often expressed frustration with the town's lack of culture. Yet as it grew, she expressed equal disappointment that the town was losing its quaintness.
There weren't a whole lot of people, about 350 people when they first came to Fort Myers, and they were coming down for rest and relaxation. And again, Thomas Edison was a famous person by the time they were married, and very well known. And the people of Fort Myers, all 350 of them, were very excited to have Thomas Edison here. But really their estate is about a mile from downtown, and they wanted privacy because Mina Edison especially wanted Thomas to have a winter retreat and to have some privacy and time for relaxation. So she tried to keep it very private at first.
It was a difficult fit sometimes for Mina to fit into Southwest Florida. Culturally, it was very different. She was accustomed to being surrounded by theater, by libraries, by museums. And when she started coming to Southwest Florida, there was very little here. The population was very small. So it was uncomfortable at times for her.
In a letter to son Charles, she wrote candidly of her frustration with the local residents.
I feel like putting up a cement wall about our place and letting those thieves alone. I detest the people down here.
Yet, 2 days later, she wrote,
This town is rank. It is not much like the early quaint town. It is too bad. Prosperity has turned their heads, I fear.
Initially, most of the Edisons' entertaining and socializing was done with well-to-do seasonal visitors from the north. But as time went on, Mina included more and more of the townspeople in her social schedule and eventually developed a genuine affection for the local residents. During the 1920s, the civic activism Mina was already well known for in her hometown of West Orange, New Jersey, spread south to Fort Myers. As her role and influence grew, Mina Edison became the city's most influential citizen.
For the last 20 years she was in Fort Myers, she really became a part of the community. She really got involved in church and in schools with different clubs. And again, everyone really enjoyed her influence that she had and what that brought to the community and to their specific endeavors.
Much of Mina's civic interests and activities focused on beautification. In 1928, she founded an organization known as the Round Table, which coordinated the efforts of the town's individual civic clubs. From the Round Table's first meeting, Mina's vision and efforts would begin to improve the face of Fort Myers.
The main idea for this group was for the beautification of Fort Myers. And again, she brought civic leaders and people from the garden club and different areas and got them all together to talk about how they could beautify Fort Myers, or just make it a nice place to live.
Mina worked with the community to find out what the needs were and put together the round table so that all those needs would be addressed, but addressed in a way that would really help the most people. And, she was a part-time resident. She didn't have to do that. The fact that she was worried, that she cared about these people, says a lot about her.
Under the direction of the Round Table, the different civic clubs took up several projects, including cleaning up vacant lots, beautification of highways, and planting block gardens throughout the town. The Round Table was also instrumental in having a tax levy for beautification restored.
From the late 20s, when she really started being involved with the community, but we certainly have things that she left behind that are really still important to Fort Myers, and so that certainly makes her an integral part of the city even today.
Mina was hailed as, quote, a social engineer of the finest ability, and Florida environmental author and Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient Marjorie Stoneman Douglas wrote in McCall's magazine that Mina's founding and nurturing of the Round Table should be recognized as one of the most outstanding civic achievements, quote, since it is an achievement not just in the material improvements of the city, but in the building up of a most amazing and creative community spirit. Through her work with the Round Table, Mina became impressed with the hearty cooperation from the town's black community in Safety Hill, which had beautified their school grounds and neighborhoods. During a time when segregation was the norm, Mina's friends within and her interaction with the black community made her a pioneer in race relations in the town.
I think it helped foster or enhance, or whatever word you want to use, the race relations during that time, because it just didn't happen like that.
Mina served as president of the Black Garden Club for many years and was even invited to dedicate Safety Hill's Dunbar High School.
She went and planted the big banyan tree that's on the corner of the school. You can see it, it hangs over, the branches hangs over the street. Well, she was instrumental in getting that planted, and I know many times people at the school have wanted to cut it down, but they said, no, Mrs. Edison, planted that tree, so they let it stay up.
Her work with the black community at the time is amazing. People in Fort Myers who stepped over the color line one way or the other were ostracized. If you were black, worse things could happen. She understood the situation and chose to help in a way that worked well with everybody. She made sure that there was a garden group in the black community, which was then called Safety Hill. She would spend time with the community. One of her closest friends was Ella Piper.
Local beauty shop owner and podiatrist Ella Piper was an active member of Fort Myers' black community and remained a lifelong friend of Mina's. In one letter to her dear friend, Dr. Piper wrote,
"One like you are not born every day. You are one of God's chosen children. You were put here to act as a medium through God to heal and help human nature. Everyone can't do it. That's a gift."
As her influence within the black community shows, Mina's Round Table proved to have a lasting impact, well beyond the boundaries of the lots and blocks where the group worked. And it wasn't just large, pressing issues in which Mina's influence was felt and her opinion valued. She was often just as influential and instrumental in some of the town's smaller issues. A perfect example involves a now well-known statue marking the entrance to Edison Park, directly across the street from the Edison's estate. In 1926, a sculptor was commissioned to create a work to grace the imposing entrance to the subdivision. As the artist's work progressed, the statue remained under a tarp, but word got out that the statue, called Rachel by the Well, was completely nude.
Some of the local ladies in town found out about it and interceded with Mina Edison that something needed to be done. So Mina Edison tromps across the street and said that the statue is going to be nude and that she would like something done about that because some of the local ladies are concerned. They came up with a solution, which was to put some clothing on the outside of her in the form of extra stone.
In issues both large and small, Mina's influence was increasingly felt. Perhaps closest to Mina's heart was her work with the city's garden clubs. During one Fort Myers visit, Mina reportedly attended no less than 27 different garden club and plant guild meetings, most of which she held at Seminole Lodge. During that same visit, just a few months after the devastating stock market crash of 1929, the groups held an outdoor waterfront festival. The following day, an editorial ran in the Fort Myers paper.
Mrs. Thomas A. Edison and her Flower Guild have done more this winter to banish gloomy pessimism than any one factor. Last night, the thousands of smiling faces surrounding Mrs. Edison and her Flower Guild ladies is a substantial corroboration that the people believe and endorse what she is doing to make Fort Myers the most beautiful city in Florida.
Thomas Edison would visit Fort Myers only one more time after that celebrated 1929 visit. Thomas Edison, Life magazine's Man of the Millennium, died October 18, 1931. He was 84 years old. City officials sent a telegram to his widow that said in part,
When this time of stress is over and you are able to settle down to the carrying on of your life guided by his memory, we hope that you will then realize that you hold as deep a spot in our hearts as did he, and we will welcome you among us again as eagerly as though you brought him with you. Your services to Fort Myers have been many and valuable, and we hope to have your help and presence for many years.
After her husband's death, Mina continued to return to Fort Myers almost every year, and in a letter to a friend, upon leaving the town after her first visit as a widow, she perhaps expressed the Fort Myers relationship best.
It was extremely difficult to pull out of Fort Myers, one of the hardest things, if not the hardest, since Dearie has left me. Some way he seemed very near to me there, different from any other place. We are attached to those in Fort Myers in a different way from others.
After Edison's death in 1931, she wrote letters to her friends in Fort Myers and said she didn't know if she could face them. She didn't know if she could come back because there were so many memories for her here. So for a while, she didn't. But when she did come back, she picked up right where she left off before. She had a schedule. She was in her late 70s. She had a schedule that would make a 20-year-old exhausted.
4 years after Thomas's death, Mina married Edward E. Hughes, a retired steel manufacturer and an old family friend, and she became Mina Miller Edison Hughes. But by all accounts, her heart would always belong to the man she had called Dearie.
Mr. Hughes, she married Mr. Hughes.
Yeah.
And, but she told me that she had only had one husband. He had a bedroom upstairs, she had a bedroom downstairs.
Yeah.
And
she said she'd married twice, but only had one husband.
Yeah.
During the late 1930s, Mina and her second husband spent most of their time in West Orange, but still managed occasional visits to Fort Myers. Following her second husband's death in 1940, Mina dropped Hughes from her name and returned to referring to herself as Mina Miller Edison. A widow again, at the age of 74, Mina still felt she had work to do. She stayed involved and active for the remaining 7 years of her life. With the approach of the nation's entry into World War II, much of Mina's activities reflected the war-era conditions and centered around the war efforts.
She gave back much more than anybody could have ever given her.
The wizard's wife, Mina Miller Edison, died on August 24, 1947 in New York City. She was 82. A suitable partner for a world-famous inventor and businessman, Mina Miller Edison was a leader in civic and charitable organizations throughout her life and was the keeper of the Edison flame after the inventor's death. Mina also seemed to have picked up the torch of her father. His efforts and influence through the Chautauqua Institution inspired people to have a positive impact on the world around them. Mina practiced these lessons throughout her life. She passed them on in her own way and to her own communities. Before her death, Mina turned over the Florida home, grounds, and laboratory to the city of Fort Myers. She was reported to have dedicated the property to be maintained perpetually as a shrine honoring Mr. Edison.
For the city of Fort Myers, we're able to share that with others, and he really only had a few other places that he called home in different periods of his life, so that's a lasting legacy.
Years before, Thomas Edison's good friend Henry Ford had purchased the neighboring property, and eventually the city of Fort Myers purchased it as an historical site. Ford had first met Edison in the 1890s while working at the Detroit Edison Illuminating Company. The two inventors became fast friends, and throughout their lives, the pair and their families spent many vacations together in Fort Myers. Thanks to Mina's foresight and planning, the Edison legacy lives on. Today, hundreds of thousands of visitors from around the world tour the Edison Ford Winter Estates each year and are afforded the rare opportunity this historic treasure provides.
So really we owe that to Mina and her foresight and her love for the community and how the community loved the Edisons. And so we still get to enjoy that today.
Thomas Edison has been quoted as saying, "He never picked up an item without thinking of how he might improve it." Mina Miller Edison seemed to share her husband's outlook and approach. Throughout their marriage, Thomas Edison received universal acclaim, and while he was making history and leaving his mark globally, Mina was quietly carving out her own remarkable niche in her own backyard.
Very little of what she did is documented. There are things that happened quietly and tactfully, and in a way that today we don't know about, don't appreciate, but should.
A portion of Mina Edison's obituary in the New York Times perhaps put it best.
Associated closely with her famous husband during some of the most eventful years of his life, the former Mina Miller was at the same time quietly distinguished in her own right.
Like the private and public gardens that Mina sowed and tended so dearly, her work in Fort Myers planted the seeds for growth, change, and beautification that can still be seen today.
She was like a gardener, and she would find a seed. She would make sure that it got planted and that it had all that it needed to grow. And when it grew, she would continue to nurture it. She would continue to be involved, and she could have just walked away and had that ground lay fallow, but she chose to plant.
To relate all the interesting experiences of our life here would require volumes, but suffice it to say that it all means a joy to look back upon.
To order a video of this program, call 1-888-824-0030 or visit our website at WGCU.org, and please refer to the program number on your screen.